My non-existent mate. My feet had carried me up the stairs, not realizing my surroundings because I was so lost in thought. It was only until Weston mind-linked me again that I snapped out of that daze. I feel the presence of two alphas in that room. Weston's gaze caught mine, his eyes darkening as he stared down at the door. I believe it's her. It definitely was. My instincts told me so. I breathed in. Just a few feet from the door, and I could already feel the power of two alphas. One which held the same scent as the pack members in Nightwake, and another that was enticing. I breathed in once more. Greedily, I wanted to wrap myself around this intoxicating scent forever. My chest felt hot, a burning desire coursing through me as my wolf bounced around. He barked, tail wagging feverishly as he stared down at the door with an overwhelming sense of urgency. My finger itched to tear open this door and see the one causing such a reaction from me. The ache forming in my chest bid me to. The closer we walked, the more audible the voices got. As a werewolf, our hearing was enhanced, only if we intend it to. If our sensitive ears were activated all the time, it would be a bitch to live every day. Rest assured that seeing him again won't change anything. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have much more important things to attend to. I felt a shiver run down me from that soft yet hard, polite but sharp, unrefined but dignified tone of her voice. My wolf whined, already impatient to see what was going on inside. I, too, was losing all sense of reason when I suddenly find my hand wrapped around the doorknob and pulling open the door. A gush of her scent hit me square in the face. The pleasurable shivers rolling through me made me knees feel weak. My eyes filtered around the room to find the source and immediately zeroed in on the petite frame of a woman in front of me. I stiffen. Surprised, pale blue eyes pierce into me with no intention of letting go. The sweet scent of flowers and vanilla wrap around her small figure. The scent that had me going off the rails since stepping foot off those stairs. My wolf was going crazy, his eyes narrowed on her like the predator he was. I could barely register the fact that there were other people in this room. Their scents were tossed to the back of my mind, whereas this woman had all of my attention. Fuck! She demanded my attention without wanting it. The creamy skin hidden under that dress tempted me to rip it off. The tease of seeing how smooth and soft her skin looked, only to be stashed away under all that fabric, woke up carnal desires from inside me. Her long blonde hair, tightly pinned up in a ponytail, only managed to bring more light to her striking features. My fingers ached to mess up that perfectly styled hairdo, just so I could watch her fall undone by me. To run my fingers through her hair and allow those luscious waves to fan out beneath her with my body hovering over her. How would she look beneath me? I groan internally. My thoughts were going haywire. Fierce blue eyes that were paired with long lashes hold me captive, her nose small and sharp, cheekbones high and complimentary, and those cursed blood-red lips that did wonders to the more reactive parts of my body. She was small. Compared to me, almost everyone was small. But she was different. Her petite size compared to my intimidating one gave me a wave of satisfaction. It brought me inexplicable joy to know that I could wrap myself around her and shield her away from the world. She could literally lose herself in me, and I took pride in that. She was so endearing. My hands tightened into fists. I couldn't help but stand there and look completely stupid, saying nothing. I've already lost my sense of rational thinking the moment I laid my eyes on her, but now I was also losing my sense of time. If I could just watch her all day and observe the kinds of facial expressions she could make, I would. Goddess, she was gorgeous, her whole being dripped with pure and utter seduction. The way her cheeks faintly tinted pink and her eyes widened with shock, but also awe. I couldn't stop the thoughts that maybe she felt the same magnetizing pull toward me as I felt for her. My wolf greedily soaked her in, and I wasn't about to go out of limb and deny that I did the same for the life of me. This woman had me wrapped up in a haze, and she didn't know it. Fucking hell, I didn't even mind. I didn't care for the confused looks of everyone around us, nor did I care that Weston was constantly trying to reach me through our mind link. He and everyone else was a hindrance. I didn't care about the original purpose of my coming here. Everyone could go fuck themselves if they think I was about to break out of this trance I was so willingly pulled into, for a desperate she-wolf and a conniving father. All I could care about was this moment with her and making sure it never ended. But of course, like all good things in this life, it had to. Mate. For a split second, I had hoped it was this goddess that uttered that dreaded word, but her lips never moved. To my dismay, she turned away to look at Hestia, who abruptly stood up, and reluctantly, my gaze followed hers until I was met with another pair of blue eyes. This time, a lot less appealing and a whole lot more infuriating. The obvious desire in Hestia's eyes rubbed me the wrong way, and I found my wolf growling at the claim she laid on us once again. I thought with our last encounter and all the rejected meeting requests, she would understand I was in no way going to accept her and give in to her selfish schemes. Alpha Locksworth, thank you so much for coming here to talk about the situation with my daughter, Hestia. Alpha Crestfield, if you will, Alpha Walker still has yet to say his part. My gaze fell to the beta and he fidgeted in his place. The nervousness inside of him didn't require werewolf instincts to detect. His face said it all by itself. Immediately, Celine glared at the beta. All sorts of emotions swirled inside her, but the most noticeable one was anger. Weston had found this amusing. He had a smug look on his face like he was just waiting for hell to break loose. My eyes drifted to the man Hestia sat beside and knew instantly that this was Alpha Walker. The brunette with green eyes that looked forward. He had yet to say something, and honestly, the look on his face as he stared at Celine made my blood boil. But I forced that thick emotion to the back of my mind when I returned my focus on the woman who so tightly held my interest with the palm of her hand. I have no business here. If it isn't pack-related, I'm not interested, she said with a certain edge to her voice. Then, without another moment's hesitation, she turned on her heel and began to walk toward the door. Now that I thought about it, she was already planning to leave when I made my entrance. My lips moved on their own accord before I could even consider what to say. I'll have to second that. I didn't come here to entertain your daughter's delusion from 3 weeks ago, Dixon. Celine visibly flinched. I could have sworn I saw her shiver, but it could also be my desires clashing with reality. What I knew for sure, however, was that Beta Dixon was glaring daggers at me. His wolf was threatening to switch over, clearly dissatisfied with the way I had completely shut down his daughter. Are you denying my daughter, your mate? Is it possible to kill someone with your eyes? I ignore Weston's input in our link and stare unamused at the beta. My patience had long been wearing thin from all this nonsense. Now, in front of Celine, it was getting worse. I rose a brow, slightly amused but still really fucking pissed. I was amused at the fact this beta was spilling forth his dominance. If he really wanted to challenge me, I would have no problem repainting Alpha Walker's walls red. I'm sure he has enough blood for the entire room, maybe even for a small storage room. Frankly, yes. I'll say this only once. She isn't my mate, but she is a liar. I looked over to a reddened Hestia who flinched under my gaze. She looked uncomfortable, her focus switching back and forth between me and the floor. She sank back into her seat beside Walker timidly, her hands hooking around one another. I don't know why, but I had this blinding emotion inside me that ached to let Celine know this woman was not my mate. I felt like I was obligated to let her know that Hestia was lying. I didn't want her to think that I belonged to someone, that I was already bound for life. As pointless as it was to feel like this, I did. If you strongly believe that, then I'm sure you won't mind if we go to the moon goddess's sacred pool. My head snapped to the beta, his face looking smug as he gave me a half smirk. Beta Benicio! Walker exclaims, looking at his beta in shock and evident nervousness. He knew this could be seen as a challenge, that if I so wished, I could accept his indirect challenge and have the right to kill his beta when I bested him. I met his smirk with my own, my blood boiling with rage, but I calmed myself. Or at least, I try to. Of course. But you must be prepared to pay the consequences in full once I prove you wrong, Beta. I paused. I expect full reimbursement for all this trouble you and your daughter have been causing me. The Beta stumbled back, making a face as if he didn't expect me to accept his proposal in the first place. Slowly, his gaze shifted to his daughter, who refused to meet his eyes. He already began to feel disheartened, but he shook away his doubts. Solemnly, he nodded toward me. I already began to feel the satisfaction of proving them wrong. Weston, too, was feeling smug. It was all until I heard Celine sigh beside me that I realized what was happening. Her focus returned to the door again, and before I could control myself, I spoke. Alpha Crestfield. Just the idea of talking to her was messing up my nerves. I knew if I didn't come up with a good reason to convince her to stay, she would leave. She'd leave, and I wouldn't be able to see her again. My wolf whimpered at the thought. Don't go. I want to tell her, but I have no reason to. Everything inside me screams for me to tell her not to go. It begs me to convince her to stay, to allow me the privilege of being in her presence. And now, with her gaze locked with mine, I'm feeling that need to keep her by my side much more. I'd like to ask you to accompany us, I say, in almost a whisper. She looked around, obviously confused, for reassurance as a liable witness. Even to me, it sounded like bullshit, but I guess it was hard to detect to the others because she merely stood there contemplating. You wouldn't mind, would you? I probe. Her beta, who I now noticed standing behind her, looked between Celine and I in obvious confusion. He definitely feels the tension between us, but couldn't make sense of it. Just like Weston, who was still trying to figure it out. Finally, after a few moments of silence, Celine just shakes her head with the purse of her lips. No, I suppose I could go. I can't begin to explain the tremendous amount of relief I felt after hearing her say that. Knowing I still had some time left with her before she eventually leaves. My wolf panted out, tail still wagging high and low. No one wasted time in getting into their own vehicles when going to the moon goddess's sacred pool. The entire ride there, I felt Weston's persistent gaze on me. I knew he had questions, but I didn't have the answers to them. At least, that's what I think. How the hell was I supposed to explain my desire for her presence? It would sound like an obsession, an infatuation I surely didn't have. I was just intrigued. I scoffed silently to myself. Liar. When we arrived at the pool, the tension that was created in the office returned. The entrance is that way, Beta Dixon said, looking directly at me. Part of me thinks he's waiting for me to back out. Like he figured I was going to pull back on my agreement because I was guilty of the claims him and his daughter were pinning on me. I had to admit, the guy had balls. He was really out here, threatening me with his wolf when he knew I could easily snap his neck like a twig. He was admirable, but stupid. His mate stood by his side, running her hands down his arms in an attempt to comfort him. I momentarily felt a tinge of jealousy in my veins. A mate, huh? Washing away that green fiend, I look over to Weston and mind-link him to tell our warriors to stay put. Stay here. The Alpha demands privacy among all those involved. It wasn't a surprise to see the other Alphas do the same. Only those involved were included in. Me, Weston, Celine, her beta, Walker, Dixon, Hestia, and her mother. Her mother has been silent the whole time since seeing her. I hadn't noticed she was even in the office until we all filed out and I caught glimpse of her ushering Hestia out. We all entered the cave. The silence of it all didn't help calm the tension. If anything, it added fuel to everyone's temper. My wolf, who was strangely excited, stayed quiet in the depths of my mind. When we got to the deeper parts of the cave, we were all welcomed with the moon goddess shrine. The sacred pool lay in front of us, untouched by human hands. The moon goddess stone sculpture with her arms stretched out gave me a sense of serenity, but at the same time, vexed. Well, there's no need to prolong this. Hestia, go on, Beta Dixon says gruffly, gesturing to the pool with the nudge of his head. His pride was getting in the way of his reason. Anyone who wasn't so blinded by their pride and unconditional trust for the lying she-wolf would see the guilty face Hestia was making. He was just so intent on proving me wrong and proving his daughter right, to actually see the obvious lies his daughter was spewing. Then again, I wouldn't fully understand how he feels. I had no daughter or son to unconditionally trust. I felt Hestia's wary gaze burn into my back, but I paid her no mind. I instead brokenly walked by her into the pool. Stopping at the front where the pool starts, I take out my pocket knife and slice my palm open. Squeezing my fist, I watched my blood bleed into the clear water until it dispersed completely. I couldn't resist the urge to look at Celine again. We held each other's gazes. The intensity behind those captivating eyes made me stiff with anxiety. Then slowly, I got bolder. My eyes traveled down to her body shamelessly, I might add. Every little crevice of her body, every little dip, curve, everything. I wanted to see and carve everything into my mind. And from the way her breathing was quickening since the start, I knew she felt the same. Whatever the fuck this thing was between us, she felt. She crossed her arms, which only managed to emphasize the swell of her chests. A groan was stuck in my throat at the sight. Celine looks away, her gaze falling to Hestia, who was slowly walking up to the pool. Turning behind her every few seconds, her gaze swept by everyone before she glued her eyes to the ground. Walker took the initiative to hand her his knife. The knife she used to slice her palm like I did. Everyone watched in silence as her blood dripped into the water and mixed with mine. I was certain of what the result would be. It was just a matter of when the water would decide to turn red. And red it was. I let out a small sigh of content knowing that Celine saw it firsthand, that she knew Hestia and I were not mates. My wolf puffed out his own delight. "Hestia, how dare you lie?" The angry voice came from Walker, who stared down at his Luna in absolute fury. His fists were tight against his sides, with his eyes wide and feral. Hestia, surprised by his tone, cowered away and stumbled back. Even Beta Dixon, who was so overly confident earlier before, looked deflated. How can he not? He put his own pride on the line for the honor of his daughter, who turned out to be lying. While part of me pitied him, another part really didn't care. Why would an alpha like myself deny my mate? That would be suicide and extremely stupid. A goddess-given gift meant to complete and love me wholeheartedly, as I would do with her, was something I dreamed of constantly. Who could be foolish enough to deny such a blessing? Instinctively, my eyes trailed back to Celine. These feelings I somehow have for her wasn't like anything I ever felt. "Alpha Locksworth, I am so terribly sorry. My daughter, I cannot." Beta Dixon stumbled on his words, his wolf bowing down in the utmost submissive position. He recognized his wrong and was begging for forgiveness. I stared at him, not letting anything slip through my facade. "My apo apologies. I'm sincerely." I turned to Celine. Alpha Crestfield. Her arms draped protectively around her chest. She kept her unwavering eyes fixated on mine, and I found it hard not to smile. This little she-wolf held more power and stubbornness than anyone I've come across. Normally they would have crumbled under my gaze and went on their knees, yet she simply stares on, patiently waiting for me to continue at my own pace. I held my hand out to her, preparing myself for her reaction at the next few words I'd say. "The test? I'd like to try it with you." She stared at me, shocked, surprised, unsure, confused. Her arms fell to her sides as she regained her composure. "That won't be necessary," she said suddenly. My chest fell in slight defeat, but I was intent on holding my ground. Everyone around us was watching in interest. Well, more like mortification, but still. My hand was still up for her to take. It may seem like a kind or gentlemanlike gesture, but really, I was just looking for an excuse to touch her. I wanted to feel her soft hand with my rougher one, to feel how warm she was against me. I wanted everything she could offer. My wolf was growing impatient, already itching for a chance to have her skin against ours. "Do you already have a mate?" I asked, not really wanting to find out. I knew if she had answered yes, I would have gone on a rampage, wanting to desperately get rid of him, but knowing I couldn't. Either way, she was bound to have a mate. And the thought angered me without saying. Someone out there was meant to do all the things mates would do. Someone was made to hold her to his chest, to cradle her soft body with his, protect her with his life, love her with everything he had in him, tell her sweet nothings at night, mold her body with his until they became one. Someone out there was made to do all those things with her. Someone who wasn't me. But I desperately wanted it to be. My wolf snarled at the images flashing through my mind, images of some man holding her in his arms. Then came the images of my wolf mauling on this man and tearing him to pieces. That somehow brought my mood up. These strange sensations coming over me like wildfire in regards to her told me otherwise of what I initially believed. This was what everyone with a mate said it was like. Tingles, sparks, unbelievable attraction. It was all there. I felt everything I would have with my mate. There was no misplacing emotions like the ones currently raining on me. So how come? How come I feel this was toward her when I was never supposed to? No, I don't. Her response almost had me sighing out my relief. If it wasn't obvious from the face I was making, I was more than happy with her response. I kept my gaze on her, walking toward her only to find her holding her ground. A smile threatened to inch across my face as she stood there, waiting. I longed to caress the side of her face, but I withheld my desire. So instead, I lift my hand higher. Please, I breathlessly whisper. Her eyes widened by a fraction as she stared at me. The word I never once used that sounded foreign from my own mouth had weaseled its way out. I was sure she was going to lash out and refrain from agreeing. I could only imagine what kind of thoughts were going through her head right now. Swallowing, the tip of my tongue swept across my lips. Her eyes immediately followed my gesture as mine swept down to hers. Then suddenly, her hand was in mine. Instantly, the tingles I've heard so much about shot through my veins. A shiver almost passes by me from our contact. Just the graze of her touch had me on my knees. Warmth, overwhelming warmth washed down on me. She stiffened, almost pulling back from the shock of our touch, but I held her in place. I didn't want to lose her touch so quickly. These feelings erupting from within me forced the unfamiliar feel of affection to surface through. She felt so good. So right. My soul yearned for more, my body willing to be the instrument she played as long as I could continue feeling her. This woman was my mate. She had to be. There was no other explanation. I swiped the pad of my thumb across the bumps of her knuckles. Each little ridge brought out more feelings of endearment from me. Such soft, small fingers curling against mine. I couldn't help but stare at our joined hands in complete wonder. This woman was my mate. A smile almost breaks across my face. My mate. The one being that would forever hold me together. The one and only person I could drown my affection in. The one and only woman I could ever confide in and cherish for the rest of my life. My lips tingled to kiss her knuckles, but I refrained. I didn't want to scare her off so early. The things she heard about me must have already affected her first impression. Snapping out of my daze, I immediately begin to tug her toward the pool. She says nothing, but I feel the uncertainty in her. I knew she felt the spark between us, but she was so certain we weren't mates, which I definitely didn't understand. The intensity of the emotions flowing between us was incomparable to anything else. At least for me it was. Once we reached the pool, I reluctantly let go of her hand. The instant her warmth left mine, I began to miss it dearly. My wolf whined, rolling over to his back, and just laid there. It was his way of sulking. Lifting the same hand I sliced through, I watched drops of my blood fall into the pool. Once the redness of my blood bled out, I craned my neck over to Celine, who still looked incredulous of what we were doing. I was certain she could see through my poker face. The softening of her eyes told me so. She gave me a look, sighing out before taking a dignified step toward me. "It's not going to work," she says. My heart clenched, but I ignore it. I move aside, giving her space to walk over to the pool. I watch intently as she makes her way forward. Walking by me, her shoulder just barely grazes against mine, and once again, the eruption of tingles swell between us. I suck in a breath, restraining my desire to pull her back to me. But she walks on as if it never happened. She raises her hand, letting one of her claws extend and sliced down on her palm. I bite back a growl, a little upset that she was bleeding but knew what for. I practically forced her into trying this out with me. Her blood inked in the water, and all I could do was stare as it cleared out. I was impatient, desperately wanting to see that shade of blue form. Only it wasn't blue, it was red. My eyes burned through the water. Disappointment, betrayal, sadness, confusion, all sorts of emotions flowed through me like a typhoon, and none of which were good. My shoulders slumped back. Like I said, she whispered quietly. I could hear the distinct tone of disappointment lace her words, but I don't comment on it. I felt the exact same way. Not mates. My throat burned, my jaw clenching tightly as I forced down my emotions. My wolf says nothing but simply watching, not a trace of his emotions filtering through our bond. I expected him to at least react, but nothing. I should have known it was impossible. I muttered to myself. Now I just felt stupid. Stupid to actually think the moon goddess has let go of her grudge against my bloodline and give me a mate. Even when I knew since at a young age that I wasn't given one, I was foolish enough to think that maybe I was. I've never doubted my fate until today, when I met the one woman who managed to stir up my feelings with a simple glance. The consuming sentiment of hope that built up inside me upon seeing her. I was ready to gamble everything I had on this slim chance. But of course, the moon goddess is not kind. She is not forgiving. She did not bless me with a mate. I didn't care about what everyone with us thought. I, honest to God, forgot they were even standing here. I was so caught up in her presence, I lost track of reality. I've seen the results concerning Luna Walker. If you need me to clarify it with the Chancellor as a witness, don't hesitate to contact me. My gaze snaps over to Celine, her face void of any hint of what she was feeling. I had no doubt she felt the same as me. But what were we to do? We weren't mates. She had one, out there. Someone who was fortunate and had the moon goddess' favor. After all, how could anyone who had someone like her as a mate be anything less than perfect? She looked at me, giving me a brief nod. Alpha Locksworth. I held in the desire to just take her and run, to just lose myself in her. Managing a slow nod, my hands balled into fists. Alpha Crestfield. Her eyes left mine to find Weston's, who she gave a silent goodbye to before scanning the rest of us. Turning, her beta followed close behind. My eyes never trailed away from her as I watched her silhouette disappear from sight. My wolf nudged me to go after her, to just make her mine and stake my claim if she would have me. The desire to do so was incredible. But I wouldn't. Even when she was completely gone, I kept looking after her, as if she would just suddenly pop back and take hold of my hand. Her scent still lingered in the air, no matter how faint it had become, and I greedily breathed it all in. Alpha Locksworth, I sincerely apologize for Hestia's false accusation of you. I will personally handle the matter myself. Once again, I truly do apologize. She stepped out of line. Walker looked down to Hestia before turning his hardened eyes over to me. And I promise you it will never happen again. My jaw ticked with amusement. Letting out soft chuckles, I walked over to him. I was already feeling the weight of my aggravation increase from all that's happened. It seemed so appropriate to take it all out now. Weston moved back, knowing better than to interfere. He felt ripples of my anger radiate through the link. I wouldn't be surprised if the warriors outside felt it. I shoved my hands in my pockets and stood tall, looming over Walker. I don't need your promises, Walker. I grit out. I look over to the father-daughter pair and felt my eyes narrow. Just make sure I never have to see that woman again. That episode of hers in front of the Chancellor cost me, Walker. You're lucky one good thing came out of this. The thought of Celine momentarily cleared up my anguish before I shook away the thought. It would do you well to heed my advice. In fact, include her father. Because believe me, the next time I see either one of their faces, I won't be so civil. Throwing one last glance over the two, I turned and strode out the cave. Weston followed close behind, his amusement from the little exchange visible in our bond. He was smirking, feeling smug from my power display against Walker and his pack. He never liked Nightwake to begin with. Ever since the attack on Duskfall, he had groomed a type of hatred for their pack. He called them cowards, traitors, and spineless for failing to aid an ally in need. Weston had seen firsthand the horrors of what rabid rogues could do, his parents being victims to the rogues currently running free. Zeneron, the master of the rogues. The name I hear him curse every once in a while in our bond. He isn't aware that sometimes his walls aren't as tough as he thinks, but even I don't call him out on it. What was that about? Weston asks me when we get settled in the van. By the time I got out, Celine was already gone. Her scent was blown away by the wind, and the only physical proof she was here in the first place was the tire marks on the ground. Looking at Weston before looking away, I fold my arms across my chest. "What do you mean?" I ask him, knowing full well what he was talking about. The whole ordeal with Crestfield? The whole mate test? The hand-holding? The damned sexual tension? Jesus, Locksworth. I felt that all the way from where I stood. I glare at him from the corner of my eyes, and he immediately raises his hands in mock surrender. What? I'm only stating the obvious. I was worried you'd be getting it on right then and there, and inside of the sacred shrine too. I shake my head, not finding the motivation to argue with him. Weston sighs and gives me a look. "You already know the situation with your family, what the witch said about your curse." "I know," I snap, not sparing him a glance. "Believe me, Weston, I know." My hand clutched onto the side of the door, my knuckles turning white from the pressure I put on it. For almost the entire ride, Weston stays quiet, the waves of his discomfort reaching me, but I push it to the back of my mind. Admittedly, the silence only served to make me a lot snappier. She was something, wasn't she? I ask him, voicing out my surprise to see the kind of person she was. At first, I expected a stuck-up, overconfident alpha who prided on beating Windrill. I was expecting to see someone who's so blatantly boastful, but she wasn't. I never should have thought she would be, seeing as she ranked second. No alpha who ranked second could ever be someone of that stature. Yes, she was, Weston drawls, looking at me with a certain glint in his eyes. She was honestly quite intimidating, nothing less from the Hellhound. I pursed my lips, thinking of her nickname, and found myself disagreeing with it. Hellhound? The name didn't suit her at all. She was more refined than a rabid spawn from hell. Yes, I had heard of her merciless kill of Windrill, but it still didn't suit her. She probably killed hundreds before, and yet Hellhound was not a name I could associate with her. It was out of place. She had the face of an angel, no doubt, her gentle, kind features that oozed off a type of purity. Not purity in the sense of doing no wrong, because frankly, there can never be an alpha that was washed away from sin. We've all done something that would be looked down upon at some point. It wasn't morals that was pure about her. It was something entirely different. Was it the vibe she gave out? Her attitude of indifference? Was it the way she carried herself with pride, but at the same time, humble and strong? Hellhound? I heard myself repeat, it doesn't suit her. Weston tilts his head to the side with a raised brow. His interest was perked from my opinion. Oh, and what name would suit her? She was different from the rest. Even in that short time of knowing her and not exchanging more than just a few words to her, I knew she was unlike any other. She was powerful but delicate, blunt but graceful, fierce but calm, confident but humble, disinterested but attentive. She was as beautiful as a flower but as tough as a nail. Wildflower. I say quietly, thinking of her mesmerizing pale blue eyes that I could easily get lost in. She's like a wildflower. Weston hummed, not bothering to hide that delighted face he was making. He was probably thinking all sorts of things right now, but I couldn't deny that what he thought was right. If he could see the attraction I had with her, then there'd be no point in trying to deny something so obvious. Just drop me off at the Capitol. I expect everything to be taken care of. Alert me if anything happens while I'm gone. Weston nods, looking at me square in the face, before letting out a grumble. He most likely wanted to probe more about the subject of Little Wildflower. I could feel his curiosity eating at him, but he refrains from asking. Soon enough, we reached the Capitol. I had doubts that Williams was here, seeing as his personal vehicle wasn't outside. It was for the best. He wasn't here. I knew I wasn't going to be much of a joy being around when Weston made a call to Williams, telling him we were on our way. I didn't miss the silent, "He isn't very happy at the moment," he whispered to him. "Take care of yourself, Alpha." Weston tilted his head down. I breathed out and nodded in acknowledgement before I made my way to my guest room. The maid who usually stays behind to greet the guests had let me in. Walking up the stairs was dreadful. Every step I took closer to my room, the more I thought about the sacred pool, Hestia, Dixon, and Celine. the last one having the most effect on me. The moment I closed the door shut, my hand reached out for the closest thing next to me. It happened to be a table lamp that I had thrown across the room. It shattered into pieces and fell around the floor. Shards of glass haphazardly strewed across the carpet. All the humiliation, disappointment, and disbelief returned at full force. I was having a hard time restraining myself from losing it in the SUV. Talking to Weston had helped, but not nearly enough to sate my frustration. The moon goddess was truly out to get me. She was toying with my emotions like she had toyed with my fate. A cynical laugh left me as I tore the bedsheets off the mattress. This was all a game to her, a game I had no power in. I began seeing red just knowing how she was manipulating all this. She, with her snide smile, watching me suffer. I don't know for how long I was wreaking havoc in my room, but it took a broken bed, dismantled table, torn pillows, slashed walls, pieces of the headboard missing, broken glass scattered on the floor, and a bathroom door ripped from its hinges laying beside the bed for me to calm down. His palms pressed into the soil, holding his weight up, so not to crush me. He looked disheveled. Messy dark hair clinging onto his skin like glue, breathing harsh and rapid, plump lips parted as he took in labored breaths, chest coated in a sheet of sweat. He looked enthrallingly chaotic. Chaotic, but undeniably attractive. I swallowed, forcing to keep my wandering eyes on his face instead of his nude lower half. Thankful that he wasn't pressing his lower half onto me, my wolf disagreed and attempted to coax me into peeking. She sent suggestive images of certain things in my mind that I knew my virgin mind wouldn't have even thought about. Or at least before seeing Razel. My cheeks burned with embarrassment at our position. His hostility had vanished and was replaced with an inkling of curiosity. He looked at me with the same puzzled expression on his face as when we were in the cave. Confused, but in awe. Taking his knuckles, he brushed them softly against the side of my face. The warmth that immediately spread over me enforced my skin to rise with goosebumps. His gaze darkened from the dim light surrounding us. Overly conscious of our closeness, I wanted nothing more than the ground to swallow me whole. It seems, though, my body had different plans. I unconsciously moved into his touch, seeking for more. The flicker in his eyes acknowledging the fact. Celine. He breathed out. I shuddered at the sound of my name leaving his lips. The way he said it with that thick accent I couldn't pinpoint. For a split second, I regretted not having a longer name. Had it been longer, the more I could hear his voice. The more I could hear him speak. My wolf purred, tongue hanging out with delight. I stopped midway of speaking when his hand brushed along the curve of my jaw. So, strange, he murmured, trailing his thumb along the point of my chin. This situation looked far from innocent. His look of eager curiosity came across as endearing. Pouty lips turned into a frown as he stared. He looked as if he was searching for something. Sought after something that he could possibly find in me. Without thinking, my hand raised to cup his cheek. He froze, snapping out of his daze, knowing my intent, but allowing me to keep going. His watchful, cautious eyes narrowing down at me in confusion when my skin touched his. Those freaking sparks, they were all over the place. Razel stiffened under my hold, his gaze holding mine captive. When he realized I wasn't going to do anything but simply touch, he leaned against my hand, softly nuzzling into my palm. My heart clenched at the sight. Dare I say it? The bloodlust alpha was like a kitten. I couldn't help the small smile on my face, the pureness of the image presented in front of me warming my heart more than I thought possible. He immediately went still. His eyes widened at me before melting into an expression I couldn't accurately explain, an expression that held nothing but undistinguished warmth. He mirrored my small smile with an almost shy one. His gray eyes melted into thick silver pools of tenderness, sentiment and conviction laying beneath them. Alpha Locksworth, why are you doing push-ups in the woods nude? Razel cursed, hanging his head low before turning over his shoulder to glare at the intruder. I shut my eyes, inwardly groaning as the sound of crunching footsteps got closer. Their scents instantaneously letting me know that the Chancellor, his mate, Elizabeth, and a few guards were approaching us. Completely forgot if I named her already and tried to look in the past few chapters but couldn't see it. If I did, please let me know, lo. I understand you want everyone to know you're masculine, but I don't think this, Celine? Williams stumbled back, dropping his hand holding the flashlight to his side. Blinking profusely in shock, he stared down at me, under Razel, who is completely naked. Ah, fuck. Oh my. Elizabeth gasped, a faint redness in her cheeks as she turned away, very embarrassed at what they stumbled upon. I cleared my throat, feeling uncomfortable under the scrutinizing gazes of the guards, only to have Razel glare at them. A low, warning snarl rumbled from his chest, in turn making them move away and avert their gazes. William's eyes widened. "Were we interrupting?" Williams asked, a slow, about inching smirk crossing his face. Razel, who still had me pinned under him, caging me with his arms, looked blankly at Williams, effectively ignoring his smug look before turning his attention back to me. It took every ounce of my will not to look away. His close proximity, that now became even more apparent to me, made me feel like a volcano about to erupt. It was getting harder to breathe because every time I did, I'd smell his alluring scent of musk and cologne. That masculinity of his just tempting me to commit the worst kinds of sins. I blushed. He noticed, and he smiled. "Oh, James, leave the two alone. You know kids are wilder these days." Elizabeth scolds, pursing her lips at Williams, who rose a brow toward her. "Wilder? We weren't much saints in our time, Eliza. Don't you remember the boat? How about your father's shed? I think we should go inside now." I say, my cheeks staining a painful red as unwanted thoughts of the two being physical circulated through my mind. My eyes were still focused on Razel, who never wasted a second looking away. "All right, everyone inside." Williams huffs out, clapping his hands together and ushering the guards to leave. He turned to look at me and smiled. "Don't think this conversation is over. You've got explaining to do." His gaze glides over to Razel, the obvious cockiness in his expression. "This goes for the both of you." If I wasn't so distracted by the amusement underlying Williams's words, I would have sensed Razel leaning forward, but I didn't. It was only until I felt his head dip to the junction connecting my shoulder and neck that I felt him. Silky, raven-black hair tickled the side of my face, his nose nuzzling against my neck as he let out a silent sigh of content. "My apologies," he murmurs against my skin, his breath fanning over the patch of flesh he laid on. "I hadn't realized it was you. My wolf was on high alert and immediately saw you as a threat from your alpha presence." I couldn't do anything but nod. I understood the situation. I truly did, but I didn't trust my voice not to break and squeak in front of him. I didn't want further embarrassment from all this. Having him pressed up on me stark naked wouldn't help either. Not that I was complaining. "My wolf?" "I meant my wolf. I suppose you should get off now." I mumble, nearly cringing at the unintentional innuendo. I wasn't too keen on the fact he was overtaking all my senses: touch, smell, hearing, taste. I snapped my eyes shut, mentally scolding myself at the unspeakable thoughts running through my mind. Razel ceased his nuzzling on my shoulder and slowly looked up, realization crossing his features as if he hadn't noticed what he was doing. A faint pinkness in his cheeks confirmed my suspicions. "Right." Pushing himself up, he stood. I tore my gaze away from him. I had no plans on ogling him like a fool. I'm sure I've done enough of that in the past 24 hours. Williams, who was still standing there, handed him a blanket that he brought with him, a thick fur blanket that draped over the floor. Without so much as looking at it, Razel took it, wrapping it around his waist before looking down to me. I was still sitting on the ground, not really knowing what to do when he walked over to me. Extending his hand, he patiently waited for me to grasp it. Against my better judgment, I accepted his kind gesture, knowing full well what kind of emotions would rush through me when our hands touched. Razel sucked in a sharp, barely audible breath when our hands clasped, electricity shooting up from the small connection. His eyes flickered up to me for a second before letting them settle on our joined hands once again. He pulled me up effortlessly. I ignored the tingles to the best of my abilities and faced Williams, who watched in silence. The quirk in his brow and questioning eyes told me he saw something in that little exchange, something he was surely going to interrogate me about later. Bad enough the position he caught us in was more than a little suggestive. The man was in the nude. I could almost hear the gossip between him and Meredith. Hell, they'd probably include Noah in it too. And somehow I know Isaac will find out, and then I'll have my own personal paparazzi by then. Elizabeth's fingers were already itching to reach for the phone in her robe pocket to spill the tea. The headaches that'll be sure to come along with it is almost guaranteed. I looked to Elizabeth, who had a familiar glint in her eyes similar to her mate's. Scratch that. The headaches are guaranteed. Well, I drawl, wiping the dirt off my nightwear. Good night, I said, turning away from them to start my journey back into the mansion. My nerves were kicking in, and the urge to scream as loud as humanly possible was mind-blowing. The embarrassment, humiliation, adrenaline from that experience had my knees shaking. Selene, I shudder, peering over my shoulder to look at him. Good night. The word comes off quiet as soft. I lick my lips, wetting the dryness away, and nodded. Good night, I breathlessly whisper. Razel. The moment that name slipped from my lips, I turned away from him. I continue walking down, ignoring the piercing gazes of Williams and Elizabeth as I walked. The one and only thing I could focus on was the feel of his heat overtaking mine. And my goddess, did it feel so good. I'm not sure if I should be disappointed or ecstatic you were trying to mate in my territory, and in the woods. I freeze midway of directing the spoon into my mouth, and blinked. I stare at Williams, who was sitting across from me, with his elbows perched on the table, and has his hands joined together. Since arriving here at the table for breakfast, he hasn't touched his food, and only drilled holes into my head from his staring. I knew what happened yesterday bothered him, but not to this extent. Elizabeth, who was sitting to his right, simply ate at her pace, occasionally glancing over to me with a smirk. First of all, I say, lifting the napkin to my lips and pat down, we weren't mating. Of course not, Williams snorts with the roll of his eyes. You didn't get the chance to. You were interrupted. And here I thought he was actually siding with me. I give him a dry look, the spoon in my hand bending. No, we weren't. You heard what Razel said. I was outside and he was too, coincidentally, and his wolf tackled me thinking I was a threat. I don't even know the man. I just met him. With that said, we aren't involved in any way other than being in similar positions as alphas. William still looks unconvinced. I doubt I could say anything that could convince him otherwise from what he wants to believe. Right. That's why you two were so comfortable with him nuzzling in your neck like that. I fight back a blush. But of course, I failed. Not to mention you call him by his first name and he lets you. Doesn't even get mad. Had you been there when your sister boldly claimed him, you'd be surprised to see the amount of anger burning through his gaze. I was worried I'd have to come in to ensure he doesn't murder her. First name? I called him by his first name. My eyebrows furrowed together as I thought back and nearly groaned out loud when I realized my mistake. I did call him by his first name as he did with me, the indication of familiarity between two people. I don't know when I stopped referring to him as Locksworth in my mind, but it must have slipped when he tackled me. Not that he seemed to mind. Whatever, it's nothing worth being so worked up about. You make it sound like a bigger deal than it is. Yes, because the two most feared alphas being caught in a very compromising position where one of them was rid of any clothes isn't a big deal. Did I mention he was on top of her? And they were in the woods? Yes. Definitely not a big deal at all. I'm sure Meredith would agree. Why don't we ask her? My eyes bulged out and I leaned forward, knocking over the glass cup and spilling my water all over the table. That's not necessary. You'd be bothering her for no reason. I poorly excuse. William smirked, casting a glance at Elizabeth, who kept a small smile on her face. I guess I'll just have to save it for when she attends the gala. Speaking of which, Williams wiped off the teasing smile on his face. He looked serious, brown eyes going hard and lips pressing thinly. You are attending, right? It's your official debut as Alpha in public. After the Windrill incident, more Alphas worldwide are interested in you, many of which planning to rob you of your place. I frown, lifting the glass cup and steadying it on its base. the water trickling down the wood and falling into a small puddle on the floor. Let them come. I'll just have to prove to them yet again that I'm not to be taken lightly. And as for the gala, of course, I have my gown picked and fitted. No worries about my attendance. Opal scurried toward me, bowing as she wiped off the water I spilled before bringing me a new one. The small puddle mopped by another maid who I believe is new, seeing as I haven't seen her before. After whispering a word of thanks, I turned to Williams, who has a deep frown on his face. They'll be there as well, Nightwake. Supposedly the Alpha and Luna are currently at war with one another. The word of her finding her mate and being caught lying has taken its toll on their reputation. I'm sure they'll go to the gala just to keep up appearances and eliminate any suspicion of their fallout. I leaned against my chair in deep thought. Fallout? Them? I shouldn't be surprised, but I am. The two lovers who went against all odds and fate are now at their tippy toes. I wonder if it has anything to do with my reappearance. I couldn't care less about whether or not they show up. As long as they don't start anything with me, I don't intend on conversing with them outside of formalities. I shake away any probing thoughts about the two and continue eating. The topic of Nightwake never brought up again afterwards. When I first got up in the morning, I was preparing myself for when I would face Razel. Whatever it was I felt for him, I had to stop from escalating. I knew that the emotions bubbling up inside me went further than mere respect. I respected him, but I was also interested. Very interested. The fact that he wasn't Hestia's mate only furthered my interest, knowing he didn't belong to anyone. The way he reacted to me also told me he felt the same. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't oblivious. I wasn't going to pretend I didn't feel the obvious attraction between us. The way he was acting with me in the woods only served to prove the point. But then again, he has a mate somewhere. I wasn't going to be some mate stealer, nor was I going to set myself up by pursuing these emotions, knowing he would eventually find his destined and inevitably leave me for her. I didn't want a relationship where I would end up losing. I've lost enough. I didn't need to lose my heart when I spent years picking it up and sewing it back together. I had to harden myself, keep my heart guarded. But when it involves him, I'm not sure how effective that could be. Just 2 seconds with him was enough to mess with my mind. Where is Alpha Locksworth? Elizabeth asks, putting into words the same question I asked in my mind. I faked indifference, casually cutting into the pancake before popping it in my mouth. You know how he is, Eliza. Williams looks over to me. He usually leaves early, going to who knows where when he visits. He's not the type to eat at the table. He's just closed off like that. I nod in understanding, feeling slightly dampened, knowing I wasn't going to see him. I was quick to fight off such feelings, and instead focused on finishing the last bits of my pancake. Razel's scent was all over the mansion, and more heavily near the room in the far side of where I stayed. Well, the gala is in a few days. I'm sure Meredith has been urging you to find a date. Williams says, cutting into his eggs. Oh, great. Another one of their talks. Are you going with someone? He cuts himself off, eyes going wide by a fraction as he looks visibly taken aback. Oh, well, this is interesting, he murmurs to himself. My eyebrows furrow together in confusion when all of a sudden a scent hits me. A scent so mouth-watering good and distinct that I don't need to turn around to know who has just made his grand entrance. My body stiffened, but I tell myself to relax. His shoes tapped against the marble, leaving behind growing sounds of his footsteps behind. Each passing sound managing to urge a shiver out of me. Alpha Locksworth, what a surprise. Williams greets, slyly casting me a look as I carried on eating. Elizabeth smiles as she stands up, giving Razel an awkward side hug in acknowledgement. I could feel the discomfort, and I automatically know that he doesn't typically greet with intimate gestures like a hug. I assume it's because he never sticks around in one place long enough for the formalities. I was intent on just ignoring his presence, but it proves to be impossible when I felt him approach me. Lifting my gaze from my plate, I met his eyes and nearly dropped my fork. He looked different somehow. He looked lighter, as if a weight that had been weighing down on him has been lifted. The dark gleam in his eyes were there, but something much more was lingering beneath them. Something I couldn't quite discern, but felt familiar to. He looked at me, and if not for the slight trembling of his hand, I would have thought he wasn't feeling every ounce of my nervousness. He did, and yet he still stood there waiting for me to greet him like a stone statue. Reluctantly, I nod at him, extending my hand to meet his, only to have him grasp it and pull me toward him. Chest against chest, my eyes went wide as I stopped breathing altogether. My hand shot out to steady myself from the whiplash and clasped my hand around his cladded bicep. The firm muscles under my hold tensing from the sudden contact, but relaxed just as quick. Somehow I'm sure he could hear how fast my heart was beating right now. I swallowed, meeting his eyes as I took him in. Finding myself at a loss for words rarely happened, but it's become evidently clear I lost my wits around this man. I was unsure of what to say or how to greet him, even when I practiced for almost half an hour in my head, rehearsing nothing but formal phrases that now seemed lost in the jumble of mess known as my mind. Unconsciously, my fingers tightened around his arm as he slowly dipped his head. Pressing his cheek against mine, my face went into flames when I felt his lips brush against my cheekbones. That soft, fluttery feel of his skin sent jitters down my body. "Celine?" He huskily whispers into my ear. "Razel," I whisper back. The softness of his hair grazing along the side of my face sent tingles of warmth pooling in my lower abdomen. I wanted nothing more than to just run my hands through them, feeling the silkiness firsthand, but decided against making a fool of myself. It was only when he pulled back, with that slight smile on his face, did I realize the name I had thoughtlessly uttered. Fuck. I used his first name again. Scolding myself, but at the same time, guiltily finding pleasure of being allowed to use his name, I pounded it into my head not to use it again. Whenever he was in my presence, I lost all logical thinking and momentarily lose myself around him. Giving me one last look, Razel looks over to Williams, who said nothing from the whole exchange. I know deep down inside, he had questions and was more than likely to bombard me with them and tease me to no end. I was just thankful he decided to hold it in front of Razel. "Are you joining us for breakfast?" Williams asks, searching behind Razel to seek Opal. Razel parts his lips, ready to spring an answer like he already considered it before coming here, when his gaze falls to my nearly empty plate. A look of slight displeasure crosses his face, but he looks away before anyone can really notice. "Actually, I done. Opal, can you please bring me another plate of pancakes?" I say, looking at Opal. I feel his eyes burn into the side of my face, and I willingly glance over to him. Licking my bottom lip nervously, I breathed in, "I'm really hungry." I finish quietly. Opal nods, stepping outside to go to the kitchen, but stops when another voice interjects. "Make that 2 plates." Razel looks at me, and I see the start of a small smile tug on his lips. "I'll be having breakfast." "So much for staying away," I mock. I can barely contain myself from wanting him closer. Wordlessly, Razel makes his way to the seat opposite of mine. My wolf was whining, looking longingly at the man who wasn't ours. If only she could talk and explain to me why she felt so attached. Her growing interest in him only served to egg me on and stake my claim. Knowing that that wasn't the greatest idea, I resort to keeping my face as impassive as possible. The least I can do is try to keep myself in check. Turning my eyes away from him, it wasn't long until Opal came back with 2 plates of pancakes in hand. She was closer to him, so naturally, she handed him his plate first, which he then passed over to me. I looked at him with both eyebrows raised, cautiously staring at the plate still in his hand before looking at him. Was there something inside it? Did he want the bigger pancakes? Was it not to his liking? "Ladies first," he explains, amused at my indecisiveness. I feel myself get hot from overthinking. Of course, I would overlook the one suitable reason he was handing me the plate. Panic was something I never worked well with. Gratefully accepting it, I mutter a soft thanks and stare at the plate blankly. I wasn't hungry. I had already eaten a plate of pancakes and eggs. I had instinctively asked for more, only because I was hoping a certain person would stay behind. I took a peek at Razel, who had already cut into his pancakes and had the fork in his mouth, his tongue poking out between his lips as he swiped down the opening. Or at least, I wasn't hungry for pancakes. Elizabeth, who had gone quiet, shot me a knowing look, a small, teasing smile on her face as she wiped her mouth with the napkin, the familiar glint in her gaze matching the one her mate had. Alpha Locksworth, we were just talking about the gala this week. It's quite special this year. A lot more is planned. Are you going to attend? Razel, who had his glass cup of water raised to his lips, looked at her before setting the cup down. Clenching his jaw in deep thought, he shook his head. No, I have no reason in attending. Elizabeth nodded slow and deliberately. She sighed, ignoring the look Williams was giving her as she then cut into her eggs. A moment of silence passes by us before she speaks again. That's unfortunate. Celine here was going to make her official debut. I was hoping she'd have a familiar face around to lessen her nerves. Nerves? What nerves? I stared at her in confusion of what the hell she was going on about when Razel's gaze cut to me. He stared at me with an unreadable expression on his face as he battled some internal conflict. With a look of intrigue, he looked at me and tilted his head to the side. You're attending this year? He sounds almost surprised. I nod, looking at Williams and Elizabeth before putting my answer into words. Yes, I am. Something flashes in his eyes and he nods. More to himself than to me. Yes, this is her first real appearance in the alpha world. I do hope you meet many wonderful alphas, Celine, more preferably single and available ones. I'm sure with that dress you'll be catching more than just a few eyes that night. The men better make sure not to trip over themselves trying to impress you. Dress? What dress? I haven't shown anyone my gown. It was a simple silk blue, strapless gown that covered me modestly. Nothing too extravagant or eye-catching. But with the way Elizabeth was talking, she made it seem like I was wearing something scandalously seductive, like preying on available men was my purpose in attending the gala. I open my mouth to ask her, but she continues, completely cutting me off before I even have the chance to refute. But anyway, it's a shame we'll miss you there, Alpha Locksworth. Do enjoy whatever plans you have. Warily, I look over to Razel. She was pinning for a reaction. It was obvious in her taunts she was trying to get something from him. So when I looked over to the Ravenhead and felt his aura prickle me in discomfort, I knew she had succeeded. The intense pressure coming off him making Opal move back a few steps until she stood near the doorway. His eyebrows were scrunched together, the fork in his hand bending with his knuckles whitening quickly. I was half expecting him to shift and half expecting him to abruptly stand and storm away. But he does neither of those things. He instead just calms himself, screwing his eyes shut for a few seconds before his grip on the fork lessened and the scowl on his face disappeared. I suppose it wouldn't hurt to go, he says finally, his voice an octave deeper than before. The evident irritation in his voice was so blatantly obvious even Opal coughed in awkwardness. I couldn't help but look surprised. He never once attended a gala. He was always sent an invitation, but he never took the time to actually go to one before. Much less send a response or explanation as to why he didn't want to go. Everyone knew he just didn't want to. Simple as that. The fact that he was coming brought alive the nerves Elizabeth was talking about. The nerves that were never there to begin with was now spiraling out of control, and it was all his fault. I felt nervous when I didn't have any reason to at first. Williams and Elizabeth give each other looks that said even they couldn't believe what had just happened. I wondered what changed his mind. Although the vain part of me wanted to believe it was because he was jealous, the more humble part of me, the bigger part, tried convincing me it was because he wanted to show me respect as an alpha. The vain part of me was more convincing. I see. I guess this year's gala will be unforgettable, Williams murmurs, looking between Razel and I. Now he was definitely questioning our relationship. I merely nod in agreement, not trusting myself from overreacting and making a fool of myself. His announcement in attending has already scrambled my thoughts all over the place. I suppose so. Razel huffs out, equally quiet. Well, fuck me if this isn't uncomfortable. Anyway, since you're attending, I'm sure you need to get yourself a suit and maybe. Elizabeth cuts herself off at the sound of someone's phone ringing. Razel silently curses to himself, digging his hand in his suit pocket before sending Williams a look when reading the caller ID. He gives him a hard nod, eyes not giving anything away. From my peripheral vision, I see Williams stiffen with a hard look glazing over his face. The two look at each other in silent understanding as the ringing echoes in the mansion. Neither Elizabeth or I do anything but look on. Just when I thought the phone would just go to voicemail, Razel answers and puts it to his ear. Excusing himself, he gets up and walks from the dining table in a hurry, but not before saying something in a language I couldn't recognize. Froimale, Costa Drendanea. I make a face. It sounded like something between Spanish and French, if that was even possible. Possibly even a little bit of Latin? I watch as his broad back disappears into the living room. Williams, too, was watching over him with a less than pleased expression on his face. His earlier comment long forgotten about. I wanted to ask what was wrong or why the sudden cold tension, but a frustrated shout stopped me. Grandinium, brother nu Sinvictor Ladnum. Reisel's harsh voice rang down the hall, filling me up with more curiosity as I look over to Williams. He ignores my gaze, knowing that I was staring, but decided to keep watching the doorway from which Razel left. A few minutes and shouts later, followed by a crash, Razel walks back in with his white button shirt unbuttoned from the first three. His hair was slightly ruffled, strands of black locks falling over his face before he rakes his hand through them to push it back into place. With a tightened jaw and a tense structure, he gives Williams a thin-lipped look. I'm heading back. I won't be needing that week after all. Razel scans his steely eyes over to Elizabeth and gives her a curt nod before turning to look at me. His gaze softened and his tightened jaw relaxed. I'll be seeing you, he says softly. Is that a promise? I pale from my own words, my wolf yipping in excitement because to her, that was our attempt at seducing him. I don't know how I managed to say those words because, frankly, I wanted to dig myself up in a ditch and just lay there until I die. I sounded eager, infatuated, hopeful, all of which were somewhat a gist of what I was feeling but didn't want him to know. The look of shock on his face was enough to make me want to crawl up into bed and scream into the pillows. The heat slowly coming over me, making me feel like an utter embarrassment on this earth. Williams and Elizabeth's silence didn't help make the situation any better for me. It just made the whole ordeal a lot more realer than I would have wanted. At this point, I was tempted to just bust out laughing before telling him it was a joke to save myself from further humiliation. And I was just about to do that when Razel's shocked expression slipped away, and he looked at me fondly. Definitely. Instant heat. My face flushed, my body overheating from that one word. The slight smirk on his face widening as he turned on his heel to leave. The smugness in his aura going out full blast. I could almost see a tail swaying back and forth in arrogance. It was only until Opal's voice sending Razel off was heard and the front door of the mansion shut did the two eager witnesses start to ambush me. Are you and Alpha Locksworth engaging in a sinful relationship? So much for not being involved. I look between them, unsure if I should feel embarrassed or mortified by the two. To their delight, I feel both at the same time. Elizabeth was the one to make the insinuation that Razel and I were fuck buddies, watched me with eyes fit for a hawk's. She watched every little movement I made to see if I would try lying, and of course, I wasn't going to. There would be no point. Elizabeth, no. We aren't fuck buddies. Like I said before, we just met, though. I peek over to them, trying not to mind the pink hue dusting over my cheeks. I admit I'm interested, but I won't act on it. I know he has a mate somewhere, and I am most definitely not going to interfere with something as sacred as that for my own selfishness. Sudden memories of Landon and Hestia infiltrated in my mind, and I almost scowl. As long as 4 years was, the betrayal was still fresh in my mind. I could care less about the fact that Landon wasn't mine. It had hurt, yes, but I got over it. The only thing I couldn't ignore was the fact he abandoned a pack. He abandoned the pack he had an alliance with. mercilessly allowed them to suffer when he could have helped to prevent it. Not to mention, he abandoned a pack member. Even if he didn't want me as a mate, I was still a member in his pack. I was still tied to them as they were tied to me. The loyalty that was supposed to be there was omitted. They chose to turn their back on me, and I couldn't help but think it was all my fault. Maybe they were so desperate to get rid of me that they decided to allow Duskfall to perish. Maybe the reason they didn't help was because I was there. Maybe they were cruel enough to sacrifice hundreds of lives as long as it guaranteed my death. My fists clenched tightly, my wolf growling in my mind as our anger combined. For years I had tormented myself with that thought, the thought that their deaths were on my hands as much as they were in Nightwake's. Maybe it was my fault that they got involved. With that running in my mind and having to see Isaac's face every day, that reminded me so much of Bentley's, I was so close to losing my sanity. The guilt and shame, so overbearing it almost consumed me whole and drove me off to a darker path. It took a slap to the face and a thorough scolding from Meredith to understand that it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. Nightwake was cruel. It wasn't my fault the rogues were evil. It wasn't my fault Duskfall had fallen. It was theirs. It was that ungrateful fucker who couldn't keep his dick in his pants' fault. I was just an unlucky pawn that got involved was all. And now there was Razel, the man who stirred both my wolf and heart like no other. I knew that it was strange to feel so attached to a man I barely met for 24 hours. It was unexplainable. The moment I met him, there just this connection. A connection that went beyond any form of logic I could think of. A connection that even my wolf acknowledged. Second chance mates were rare, and typically, people who had a deceased mate were the ones who got them. I never heard of a rejected mate getting a new one. Then there's the topic of Razel having a mate. From the time he first became an alpha at a young age, the spotlight was always on him. Granted, no one was close enough to him to really get any info, and the fact that he strayed away from social events definitely didn't help anyone get a better idea of who he was. But never did the topic of his mate get brought up. It was possible his mate had passed, and it was also possible he hadn't met his mate yet. But the mutual attraction between us was strange. Was it all just lust-ridden? The sacred pool had already declared us as not mates, so why were our wolves responding so well to one another? I pondered for a bit, knowing I wasn't going to get an answer, but couldn't help myself to. He doesn't have a mate. My eyes snapped to Williams, who sat there with a vacant look in his eyes, a small frown on his face as he stared at me silently. His mate passed? I asked quietly. My wolf went silent, not sure how to feel about the situation. She knew how much it hurt to lose a mate, but she didn't know how much it hurt to lose a mate. A mate that actually loved her and returned her affections. Landon and I never established any kind of relationship like that, so our loss wasn't that much of a big deal anymore. It was easier to forget something you couldn't really dwell upon. No, it's a little more complicated than that. His nervous glance to Elizabeth told me he knew exactly how much more complicated it was, but he chose not to share it. Williams sighed, setting his dining utensils down as he laced his fingers together. It's not my place to say anything, but... He gave me a small smile. Don't back down if what's holding you back is his mate. Trust me, Celine, you won't be doing anything bad if you choose to pursue your feelings. You're not stealing him from anyone. That much is true. He swallowed, pushing his seat away, and held his hand out to Elizabeth. She interlocked their fingers as they looked at me with a hopeful expression on their faces. We must go now. We have to officiate some details for the gala. I nodded in understanding, but kept my mouth shut, his words running through my mind, as cryptic as it was. But Celine, Elizabeth looks at me seriously. If you want him, get him. Then she shoots me a thumbs up before sauntering away, dragging Williams behind her. I think over their words. I was sure Williams wasn't lying when he said he didn't have a mate, but at the same time it didn't sound like he met her yet. As much as I would like to get him, there were too many unexplained answers. Answers I was itching to get but had a slim chance of actually receiving. And just like that, a week went by and it was the night of the gala. I was in my guest room at the Capitol, wrapped in my fuzzy robe with my hair damp as I stared down at the gown hanging in my closet in horror. I was planning to return to Greyhound after the night of the gala. Noah and his mate, Melia, were meeting me here. They too were invited as my beta and the beta female. Isaac would have attended too, but according to Cade, who was also attending, he wanted to stay back at the pack so he could finish training them quicker. I would have smiled at the memory if it wasn't for the fact I was beyond petrified by what I was seeing. The simple blue silk dress I had picked was nowhere to be seen. Instead, I see a black, form-fitting lace gown with intricate gold lining detailing around the plunging neckline and the hem of the gown. Just below it was matching black pumps with golden floral designs wrapped around the heels. I stared and continued staring. It didn't disappear. With a groan, I fished out my phone, which was buried under the piles of clothes I had stripped out of when I was getting ready to take a shower, and immediately called the designer, who I was also good friends with. He was the one I purchased my gown from. The personal designer I had since beginning my time as Alpha. After the third ring, he answered. "Where is my dress, Antonio?" I asked in a hurry. There had to be some mistake. This was not the gown I had personally picked out and fitted for. There might have been a mix-up, a terrible, terrible mix-up that needed be solved. "Whatever do you mean, Alpha?" I clenched my teeth. My patience was wearing thin, and the fact that he was sounding like he was having fun with this was pushing me to the edge. "Antonio," I grit out. Finally, he sighs. "I'm sorry, Han. Meredith asked me to send you that dress. She practically ordered me to." I closed my eyes in attempt to calm myself. Of course she did. But you should be glad she did. That dress you picked was cute and all, but it did you no justice. This one is a killer, and you damn well know it. I was now beginning to understand what Elizabeth was talking about. The dress that she kept bragging about to Razel was real, and it so happened to be the one hanging in my closet. Those two were planning this, and I had no doubt in my mind that Noah was part of this too. He was, after all, the one that personally brought me the dress inside of a gray garment bag. I was just too naive to check. I should have known there was a reason Meredith said nothing when I showed her the dress I picked, even with that look of distaste on her face. Sighing, I pull the phone from my ear after defeatedly saying goodbye to Antonio and tossed it to the bed. With one last grumble to myself, I pull the soft gown from hanger and begin to put it on. The gown was gorgeous. There was no denying that. It fit me perfectly. Fit and snug in all the right places. I wasn't foreign to tight-fitting clothes. I had worn a great deal of them before, but I had wanted to go out comfortable for tonight. Forcing myself to handle countless alphas, all plotting some way to get rid of me, earned me the right of comfortable clothing. It hugged everything my body had to offer, and I had to say, I looked damn fine. My blonde hair was slicked back, my neck laced with a diamond necklace Isaac had given me for my birthday, and my ears adorned with matching diamond droop earrings. I had a hair and makeup team do the finishing touches. When the preparation was over with, I had stepped out of my room to see Noah and Melia waiting outside. Melia, with her brown hair pinned up in a bun, was wearing a simple white sweetheart neckline gown that reached just above her ankles. Noah, who was wearing a black suit, had his hair slicked back with gel and a permanent smirk on his face when he saw me. Melia gaped, looking at me as she whistled. "If I was lesbian, I would so do you." I bit back a cough as Noah looked down at her in shock. The pure look of betrayal in his eyes as he stared at his mate grew when he put a hand to his chest. "And leave me out of it?" He shook his head in pure offense. "That's just cruel, Melia." She shrugged, looking bored as she shot me a wink. "Well, I wouldn't want to share. I would want her all to myself. Isn't that right, Alpha?" I raise a hand, unable to take any more of this. These two were bad enough alone. So together? Yeah, no. I think this is the part you two stop. I don't even want to consider the things going through your minds right now. The two immature kids giggled to themselves. I could barely make out what they were giggling about, but it was most definitely something inappropriate. Sucking in a breath, we start making our way to the ballroom. The gala had already started about an hour ago. I would have went earlier if it wasn't for my dress being delivered late, thanks to Noah, who so wonderfully decided to make a stop at McDonald's for an Oreo McFlurry. Again, I found myself questioning my choice of putting him as beta. All jokes aside, I had mentally prepared myself for what was to happen through those doors. Many of the alphas attending would be surveying me, watching out for any mistake I'd make, even if it was just a minor one, such as forgetting to laugh at a poorly made joke. Everyone attending tonight was out to kill. I just had to make sure I wasn't going to be one of their victims. Aren't you nervous, Celine? I look over my shoulder to Noah, who genuinely looks worried for me. He was probably worried about my reaction to seeing Landon and Hestia or any of the Nightwake members that could possibly attend. It was either that, or that he was worried the alphas here would eat me alive with their presence. No, I'm fine. I tell him honestly. I wasn't worried about the whole gala thing. As I trained for the alpha position, Meredith has also trained me for etiquette and how to handle myself at social events. It was a big part in her instructions. You could make it or break it during these things. You could make new allies, but at the same time lose some or even go as far as making some enemies. It took one wrong move, one wrong word to break the balance of peace. Admittedly, the only thing I was really slightly nervous about was Razel. After listening to Williams and Elizabeth, I still hadn't made up my mind. For now, I decided to go along with my initial plan, though it didn't work out, which was to distance myself. I had been so distracted by him that I underestimated my pull toward him. Now that I knew the extent of my attachment, I could at least refer to him with his last name. We walked into the entrance, and immediately I was met with the loud chatters of people and the sound of glass clinking and heels clicking. With my head held high, I walked in with my beta and his mate following behind me, all traces of our good nature hidden under stoic, hardened exteriors. Playtime was over, and they knew it. From the first step I took, I already caught everyone's attention. The alphas that had come sniffed the air, recognizing me as an alpha they never met, and instantly began to wonder about me. Pairs of eyes followed my every move, and the once loudly chattering atmosphere was replaced with a quiet, tense one. Ah, Alpha Crestfield. I turned my head to see Cade walking toward me with a small, pretty, dark-haired girl beside him. From the newly made mark on his neck matching the one on hers, I put two and two together and realized it was his mate, the mate that he had been forcibly separated from by his father. I smile, noticing how much healthier he looked now compared to before. The dark circles were long gone, and his eyes were a lot more vibrant. Alpha Woods, I greet with a nod. I turn to the woman beside him, and she blushes, fumbling with the material of her rose gold dress. And this is? Cade smiles, placing his hand on the small of her back before looking down at her. This is my mate, Kayla. He breathes affectionately, the love in his eyes burning wild for the small female beside him. She mirrored his expression, squeezing his arm in reassurance as she looks at me. And nice to meet you, Alpha Crestfield. You look beautiful. She gushed, red cheeks and all. A sincere smile inches across my face as I laugh to myself, amused by her cute awkwardness. Thank you. You look gorgeous yourself. I'm surprised Alpha Woods has managed to keep his hands to himself for so long. I shoot him a smirk, which he returned. Oh, believe me, Alpha, these hands weren't to myself earlier, buff. He stopped when Kayla squeezed his arm harder. Giving her a sheepish smile, he cleared his throat and grinned at me. Gamma Isaac has been a really great help. My pack members have been improving drastically, just from 1 week alone. I don't think he needs 2 months to train them at this rate. He's so thorough and concise, it's almost terrifying. I can't stop the pride swelling in my chest. My wolf and I love to hear someone praise my members. It was one of the most rewarding things to an alpha, to know that their members were being recognized by fellow alphas. The success of the pack members was the success of the alpha, and it was beyond exhilarating to hear someone speak so fondly of my gamma. He is quite strict, though. Cade adds in thought. I see him cringe as if he remembered something, and I stop myself from laughing. I'm sure he is. I didn't just give him the position for no reason. I muse. Cade nods and shrugs. Indeed, he is well deserving of that title. He's become good friends with everyone in the pack. They all look up to him. Speaking of friends, I want to formally request an alliance with you. That is, if you are willing. I give him a smile. I was already writing up an alliance pact to make with Cade before formally asking him, but I guess he beat me to it. I'm more than willing. We'll have to discuss this in a more. I glance around, noticing how everyone was watching us. Suitable environment. Cade catches my surveillance and looks around. His expression hardened as he nodded. He knew these alphas were out to look for weaknesses. Everyone had their gazes pinned on us, and I had no doubt in my mind that they were also eavesdropping. You're right. My apologies, Alpha Crestfield. I suppose we'll just have to settle with making an appointment. Looking down at his beloved, he holds her tight. Michaela and I will be on our way then. We still have lots to do back at the pack. We hope to see you, and please expect a meeting request soon. Cade brings out his hand, and I take it firmly. We smile one last time before he goes off to leave after saying goodbye to other guests. Malia and Noah, who had drifted off to the sidelines, were now by my side. I could already see a few alphas inching closer to me, probably with the intention of engaging in a conversation. I inwardly sigh. This was going to be a long night. Noah, Malia, you two enjoy the night. I can handle it from here. Noah looks ready to protest, but I give him a pointed look, leaving no room for argument. He breathes out slowly and nods, taking Malia's hand as they drifted off to the dance floor. The moment I was alone, two alphas who I recognized as Alpha Reynolds and Alpha Sai approach me. My wolf straightened, her fur ready to bristle out if she felt the slightest bit of killing intent. The two alphas seem friendly as they go. I didn't feel anything bad from them, but I didn't feel anything necessarily good either. You must be Alpha Crestfield, Sai begins, thrusting his hand toward me. I took it with my own and shake it as I did with Reynolds. More and more eyes focus on me when I confirm their suspicions. Yes, I am. I assume you two are Alpha Reynolds and Alpha Sai. The two look at each other, slightly surprised to hear that I know of them before they let out a hearty laugh. The two men giving out a pleased vibe from being recognized. Why, yes we are, Reynolds smiles. We've heard so much about you. Obviously, seeing you dethrone Windrill like that was also quite a feat, but hey, I doubt anyone's complaining. I smile, shaking my head in amusement. The two were there that day at the conference regarding Theo and Val. I guess that's why they knew to keep their distance. They weren't trying to get on my bad side. They knew better than to. The conversation between the three of us flew by, and next thing I know, we're all saying goodbye, and a new batch of curious onlookers are here. Speaking as eloquently as I could was tiring. Keeping up these fake smiles and pretenses were also exhausting. Meredith had warned me about the emotional and mental drain that came with these galas. By now, everyone had calmed around me, but there was still slight tension. It was like they expected me to just suddenly shift and start mauling on everyone like a feral animal. I was a little annoyed, but I understood why. I tried not to let it get to me, but what did bother me was the amount of alphas who had sons around my age, trying to discreetly bring up possible marriage proposals. One thing the gala was also known for was its matchmaking service, a service I wasn't dire in need of, at least not with the people they were bringing up. I was currently talking to a group of Lunas, all of whom were trying to brag about their sons. One Luna in specific, Luna Cavelli, was going on and on about how her son was looking for a woman of my caliber. I could feel the twitching need of an eye roll, but I did my best to maintain my impassive expression with a smile. The number of times I've heard "it must be hard being a sole alpha" was more than I could count on both hands. Luna Cavelli was just about to go into depth about her son's future visit here when I caught a whiff of a familiar scent. A familiar scent I couldn't misplace anywhere. They arrived. Hestia and Landon walked in, her hand hanging on his forearm with a tight smile in place. She wore a pale blue, sleeveless dress that loosely flared down her hips. A pretty similar styled dress to the one I had initially picked out. Hestia and I always had similar tastes. It wasn't a surprise she chose blue as her color. We've heard that it suited us better and that it brought out our eyes." I was beginning to thank Meredith for sending me this dress. I knew the instant he stepped in, he smelt me. He looked through the crowds, eyes searching around until they found where I stood. Landon's dark hair gelled up, his body cladded in a dark blue suit to match Hestia with a white button up under. His eyes stayed fixated on me, his mouth slightly gaping as he trailed down my figure. Fire. Scorching disgust left behind with each passing second, his eyes took me in. This was uncomfortable. I looked away, not sparing him another second, but his heated gaze still pinpointed where I was. His attention was sickeningly sticky. Everywhere his eyes passed down left behind a muck of repulsive emotions quivering straight through me. Benicio and Sophie were also here, standing right behind them, dressed just as formally and undoubtedly looking in my direction too. I don't look their way. I simply allow others to start crowding around me, full of questions and eyes shinning with intrigue. My wolf huffed out her annoyance, clearly over with the whole event, and wanting nothing more than to just go home to Greyhound and be let loose. She rolled on her side, staring leisurely at all these new faces crowding around us. "Alpha Crestfield, I don't believe we've met." I look up, taking notice of a fairly young man, lean and tall with sandy blonde hair and chocolate brown eyes. He smiles at me with a drink in his hand, and soon the Lunas surrounding me move aside for him. I arch a brow at this, knowing that he wasn't an alpha, but understanding that his presence was still undeniably strong, almost on par with an alpha, but not exactly there. "Yes," I breathe out, turning my body to him. "I don't believe we have." Blondie flashes me a coy grin, and I could have sworn I heard a few of the women swoon at the sight. I smirked to myself, almost letting a soft scoff leave me. He's handsome. I'm not blind to see his physical appeal, but he also screams womanizer just as blatantly. We'll have to change that, won't we? My name is Marco Williams. He holds his hand out to me, and I take it only for him to bring my knuckles to his lips. Pressing a light kiss, he peers through his lashes, trying to see if his little gesture has an effect. His mouth slightly tugs down when he sees me staring at him indifferently. He recovers, straightening up. "So you're the famous nephew," I say amusedly. Marco's grin bounces back on his face as he nods. Looking at him now, I could see somewhat of a resemblance to Williams. They both had brown eyes, and their heights were somewhat the same. Marco was a lot leaner than Williams, though. "Yes, Uncle James has often told me about you. He and Aunt Elizabeth seem quite fond of you, but I can say that after meeting you personally..." His eyes scan me down. I'm not surprised to see why. I can say I'm beginning to be just as fond of you as they are. The Lunas who still surround me watch as I suddenly laugh. My body shook as more rumbles of laughter passed through my lips. A streak of confusion flashes in his eyes, but he's quick to cover it. "Not only are you a comedian, but you're also quite the flirt." Marco smiles, a certain gleam in his eyes at my words. He knew he wasn't going to get anything from me, but he was still trying. He must have thought that by having many witnesses around us, I would have went along with his not-so-subtle flirting just for the sake of saving face. His flirts were harmless. He was most likely testing me rather than actually trying to get in my pants. The intimidation factor was not working. Unfortunately for him, we observe each other, eyes betraying nothing of our inner thoughts. He was cunning. I found from our little conversation just how very careful he actually was. Any Williams blood would be. It would seem Marco was no exception to the saying. I was so engrossed in trying to break through his mask that I didn't notice the growing tension behind me. A chill ran over me. My eyes fled to the far side of the floor, seeing Landon watching with enraged eyes. His grip on Hestia's hand tightened to the point she was trying to pull away, but he didn't notice. His gaze was directed on Marco, who didn't feel the slightest bit of tension being projected onto him. Some alphas who were standing around seemed to stiffen, detecting the aura of aggression, and looked around for the source subtly. He looked like he wanted to say something, and he did. Landon walked toward us, breaking away from Hestia and leaving his entourage behind. They helplessly looked after their alpha, afraid of the kind of stupidity he was about to commit, in his state of fury. My wolf snorted, laying back down, and continued to stare blankly at the swaying bodies of people beginning to dance. Already tuning out half of what Marco was saying, Landon was about 3 feet away when a sudden silence fell upon us. The sound of shoes prattling on the marble floor echoed in the pin-drop silence of the ballroom. Landon had completely stopped walking, his earlier anger diminished as he stood staring. Even Marco, who was yapping on and on, fell silent to watch the intruder. My heart thumped against my chest, a burst of anticipation running through me. Curiously, I looked toward the source and held my breath at the sight. Razel walked in wearing a black suit tailored specifically for him that outlined the firmness of his build. His broad shoulders highlighted and his muscular arms flexing as he ran a hand through his hair. His dark, luscious hair attempted to be slicked back only to have some locks fall over his eyes. That chiseled face I've been seeing in my dreams coming to life right in front of me. He looked so breathtaking. After a few days of his absence, my body felt this wanton need full force. My wolf stood on her legs quickly, ecstatic at the sight of him as she barked out her excitement. He was alone. The beta of his, nowhere in sight. Or a date. I hiss at my subconscious and force the giddiness down. He caught everyone's attention the moment he stepped in. He stopped walking, eyes scanning the cluster of people huddled in groups, no doubt ready to gossip about his appearance the moment the tension left. He kept scanning each person he looks by freezing up when they felt his gaze, and slowly he reaches me. We lock eyes, a shattering breath forcibly leaving me as his gaze narrowed down on my dress. I feel his eyes outline my figure, his jaw clenching as they looked down my chest, waist, hips before slowly making their way up. Fuck. My legs felt like jelly and he just looked at me. I expected him to walk on and venture around the jungle known as the elite's playground, but he doesn't. He walks, all right, but toward me. My hand automatically clenches up until I feel the band of the greyhound ring dig into my skin. He got closer and closer, eyes following him like a magnet you were unable to separate yourself from. When he finally reaches me, he glances down at Marco, whose eyes widened by a fraction before stepping back and looking away. Everyone's attention was on us. You can do this, Celine. Just do what you planned earlier. Make distance. Separate yourself. The little pep talk I had with myself proved to be somewhat helpful. Mustering up all my courage, I speak before he does. Alpha Locksworth, it's a pleasure to see you again, I said steadily. Razel's mouth twitches, but his gaze grows colder. I'm almost tempted to reach out to him, but I don't. That doesn't stop my fingers from twitching to do it. He presses his lips thinly before giving me a nod. Likewise. I thought that the conversation, if you can even call it that, would be over and end there, but again he proves me wrong. A passing waiter who nervously offers Razel a glass of champagne stops when Razel reached out to take not one, but 2 of the alcoholic beverages. He looks over to me, handing me one, and I take it almost too quickly. Trying to act calm was a feat in his company. But of course he notices, and the panty-dropping smirk had made its appearance. Marco and the Lunas had all slowly inched away when Razel made it his point to stand beside me. The music continued playing, and so did the chatters among the ballroom, but what didn't change was the eyes glancing toward us every so often. Noah and Mylia, who were dancing with each other, sent me looks of concern before warily drifting over to brooding man beside me. Waving off their needless worry with a small smile, they returned my gesture with their own, when I was certain they didn't believe my attempt to assure them. Sipping on the silky beverage, I looked to Razel, whose focus was on the couples dancing in the center, his startling gray eyes never ceasing to amaze me.